Good morning, Americans. This is your favorite alien here on the morning of Saturday, August 28th, 2021. Sitting in for Paul Harvey today, stand by for commentary. Well, today's commentary is on a couple of emails I received from three people. Alan J. from Encino, California, a Beverly B. from Wausau, and I believe that's in Wisconsin, right? Yeah. And a George G. George G. from Salem, Oregon. Wow, that's a long ways up there. And George G. said it the best of all three, I think. He said, well, Mr. Alien, I don't know whether to take you as a quack or something else, but you have nailed something on the money that's driving me crazy, and how you know. Well, as the people say, Mr. George, it's for me to know and you to find out. And he says, and you're very much anti-American. Am I? Really? Mr. George, you tell me why I'm anti-American. You say in your letter that I always put you down. I don't. I always tell you what you messed up on, not put you down. Excuse me. To me, as an alien from another planet, your Declaration of Independence and your Constitution are probably the closest I've seen to an advanced society other than our own. Okay? And a lot of places that are now Federation members of our Federation started with a lot less and had bloody past, just like you have bloody past. But you guys had the insight that you guys never used. They had to find it out by themselves, and it cost them treasure, as you guys call lives. Excuse me, in order to find it. So it cost them millions of lives before they actually found it. You guys haven't paid that much treasure. Maybe what? In the war, 600,000? Well, 1,000,000 if you add your own civil war to it. But in the pandemics, you paid the price. You're paying over 1.5 million dead in 2 pandemics in 100 years. Whew. And then you don't count the obvious measles and smallpox and everything else that happened between 1776 and today. So I would say that in pandemics, you're probably at 10 million dead. All because of your way of thinking. And you guys, if there is a supreme being, as I call him, the boss, he gave you numerous opportunities to change your people. I mean, human beings, not just Americans. And he used the Americans as a means to an end. And you guys have failed them time and time again. Oh, Mr. Boss. And Mr. Harvey, if you're up there with the boss, tell him I'm sorry, but they got watermelons for brains down here. Yo-ho! Yeah. Case in point, the last time, September 2nd, 1945. And George G., you pointed out that that day is supposed to be your greatest day. You ended up being the victors. Victors? Really? Where'd you get this, George? Victors? In a war that was a total war, planetary war. Over 90 million people died in this war, George. And you call it a victory? Where did you come from to say that? I wouldn't say, if you got 90 million of your inhabitants on the planet dead, I don't consider that a victory. The problem, George, is you guys are the survivor, okay? You guys survived total war without being scratched. Sure, you lost 406, maybe 460,000 of your sons, cousins, brothers in the war. And sisters, don't forget that. Because you had nurses and wasps and all kinds of women in there, and women that were doing your factory work because your men were out there. This is what you Americans got to sit down and say, hey, we survived the war. We didn't win it. You survived it. And we got lucky that we survived it intact. We had a lot of things to pay for it. You had rationing and you had this and you couldn't have that. And then at the end, you had all the resources that the world had destroyed. For about 25 years, you were top dog. And you didn't understand that. You had everything in your control to change the planet. And you did nothing about changing the planet, did you? No. Case in point, the United Nations. What were you thinking when you formed the United Nations? There was no such thing as nations, and there was no such thing as united in 1945 on September 2nd. And you approved it in October of 1945. And of all cities to approve it, it wasn't New York City. And this is what Gene Roddenberry was trying to tell you in Star Trek. It was San Francisco, the headquarters of his federation. San Francisco, okay? And what he should have said in his vision, which he didn't, and I blame him for this because it cost you another 70 years of disaster. You should have had only 3 members instead of 5 being the top dogs. And they are the United States for being the survivor, Germany and Japan for being the disastrous war starters. And they learned their lesson. Sure, Germany was half, but you know sooner or later that the Russians could not keep the other half of Germany because Russia and the Soviet Union at the time was destined to go declining. Decades later, it did. But you could see even in 1945, it survived as the strongest power in Europe, not the strongest nation in Europe. And there's a difference there. And the other people, the British and the French and the Chinese. The British and the French were stupid. They still had their British Empire and the French colonials. Yeah. And they learned nothing about World War II until they had to fight wars for independence from those colonies in the late 40s, 50s, and 60s. And by 1965, all their domains were gone. Period. And China. Why would you give a seat to China? Chiang Kai-shek was almost as bad as Mao Zedong. There was no difference between them. Why? Because he wasn't communist? He sure acted like it, didn't he? He sure acted like Hitler and Stalin. Chiang Kai-shek? Look him up. He was bad. Even when he went to Taiwan, he was still Chiang Kai-shek. Corrupt. Oh yeah, he was a corrupt guy. But you should have adopted the United Nations and say, only these nations will be admitted. And I wouldn't have admitted Britain, I wouldn't have admitted France, and I wouldn't have admitted Russia or China until they specify that you have rules of engagement and prime directive to be in the unity of nations. We may not like you, we may not agree with you, but outside of your territory, you must abide by the rules of nationhood, which you had to adopt. A prime directive which you never adopted either for yourself or the United Nations. Therefore, you are where you are today. You see what I mean, Americans? Here you stand on the precipice where you have to decide what you want to do. Do you want to go back to the old style with the Democrats and Republicans and the discourse that they have caused over the last 70 years? And your political infighting And you're bringing people from other nations in here that's cost you a lot of difficulties on your own society because they're bringing their society with them. And some of them hate to be here because they were forced to be in here or get killed over at the other side. You see odd cases where their descendants, like the Vietnamese, you see people speaking English with no accents from Vietnam. They look Vietnamese, but they actually are Americans. If they went to Vietnam today, they couldn't live over there because they have nothing in common with them. It's like you African Americans, if they say, oh, sent you back to Africa. You have nothing in common with them. Centuries between you and them. You may look like them, but you have nothing in common with them. And that's the problem when you come to another society and you get amalgamated because the society takes some of yours and you take some of theirs. But you can't keep 100% of yours and they can't keep 100% of theirs. Do you understand what I mean? This is your favorite alien sitting in for Paul Harvey saying, do you understand, George G., what I'm talking about here? And all the rest that wrote me, including the other two from Encino, California, and Wausau, Wisconsin, I believe, that you guys had it made. The boss gave it to you on September 2nd, 1945, in a silver platter, and you guys destroyed this planet. Good day.